Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into, well, a pretty complex situation, a disturbing one, really. It's about the murder of Brian Thompson, the CEO of UnitedHealthcare.
Oh, wow.
And we're going to be looking at it through, well, through two lenses, I guess you could say. We've got some pretty raw public reaction that we found online, Reddit comments specifically. And then we'll also be looking at this CNBC article that kind of tries to paint a different picture, a different side of the story.
Yeah, I mean, it's always interesting to see how different sources can frame the same event, sometimes in totally opposite ways.
Exactly. So I guess our mission here, what we want to try to figure out
Yeah.
is what is this event and all the reaction to it? Tell us about healthcare in America. What's bubbling up to the surface?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a chance to really dissect not just the crime itself, but all those underlying currents, the social and economic factors that may have played a role.
So let's start with the facts of the case. Brian Thompson was shot and killed, targeted attack it seems. This all happened in Midtown Manhattan. The police say the gunman was waiting for him right outside this hotel. Thompson was at some kind of investor conference there.
Hmm.
And the details they're really unsettling. The police report said multiple shots were fired even after the gun jammed. Can you believe that?
Wow, that's intense.
It really points to like a level of intent. This wasn't just some random act.
Right, right.
And then there's this other detail. It's chilling, to be honest. The words, get this, deny, defend, and depose were etched onto the shell casings.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, doesn't that feel like a message?
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's almost like a direct reference to that book. What was it called? Delay, Deny, Defend.
Yes, that's the one.
The one that exposes all those tactics that, insurance companies use to get out of paying claims. Whoever did this, it seems like they really wanted to send a message.
Yeah. And it seems like that message resonated. The Reddit comments are, well, intense is an understatement. I've never seen such animosity towards a murder victim.
It is pretty unusual. Usually you see, some sympathy, some sadness, but here people are saying good riddance. Some are even, it's almost like they're celebrating. There's a lot of rage there directed at Thompson and I guess what he represents.
I think to understand that rage, we have to understand the American healthcare system and how people experience it, personally.
Hmm.
A lot of the comments we're seeing are from people who have just had really negative experiences with healthcare and specifically insurance companies.
Yeah, for sure. These aren't just like theoretical complaints, These are real people, real stories of dealing with denied claims and just crushing medical debt and just this overall feeling that the system, it's like it's working against them.
Right. One commenter talked about how they basically had to become their kids' occupational therapists because insurance wouldn't cover it.
Hmm.
I mean, can you imagine the burden that puts on a family?
It's unbelievable. And it really speaks to a much larger issue with our system, right? It's so complex, so many hoops to jump through. It takes so much time and resources and knowledge that, well, most people just don't have.
And if you don't have those things, time, money, you're just stuck. You're basically at the mercy of these companies, and their whole goal is to keep costs down, even if it means saying no to people who need help.
Yeah, and that brings us back to UnitedHealthcare, right? They've got this reputation for being difficult when it comes to, approving claims. Their denial rate, it's actually 32%. That's double the industry average.
Wow, that's a crazy statistic.
Yeah.
So this case, it's not just about one CEO or one company. It's tapping into this much bigger frustration that people have with the healthcare system in general, with the way things work in this country.
Definitely. I think that's a major takeaway here. It's not just about Thompson. It's about a system that so many Americans feel is, well, broken, unfair. In his case, it's like it's become this focal point for all that anger, all that frustration.
And it makes you think, what does it say about a company, about an industry really, when CEOs need personal security? I mean, we saw that Humana and Cigna are providing security for their CEOs, and yet Thompson chose not to have it.
It's a good question. You wonder if maybe, I don't know, maybe they just didn't grasp how much anger is out there, how much resentment people feel towards the whole industry.
And then there's that irony that crazy detail that he was taken to Mount Sinai West, a hospital that doesn't even accept UHC insurance.
Wow.
It's almost like some dark cosmic joke.
It really does highlight just how absurd the system is, right? Even in death, he's affected by the very system, the very company that he profited from.
And I think that's part of what's fueling some of the dark humor you see in those Reddit comments. People are pointing out these ironies, making jokes. I guess it's a way to cope with it all, the injustice, the
Yeah,
absurdity.
it makes sense. When you're faced with something so tragic, so outrageous, humor can be a defense mechanism, you know? It's
Mhm.
how we process difficult emotions.
So we've got this crime, this targeted attack with a very clear message, and then we have all this anger and frustration online, and behind it all, this healthcare system that's leaving so many Americans feeling, well, helpless and betrayed. Where do we even go from here?
I think the next step is to dig deeper into those systemic issues. What are the things that are contributing to these high denial rates? How are patients affected? And what are some potential solutions? We really need to unpack that.
That's a great point. Let's dive into some of those questions in the next part of our deep dive. We'll take a closer look at the inner workings of the healthcare system and try to understand what's really going on, what forces are shaping this crisis. Okay, so we've talked about the murder of UnitedHealthcare's CEO and that huge public reaction, especially online. But I think it's time to kind of shift gears a bit, really try to understand like what's broken in the American healthcare system.
Mm.
Because those Reddit comments, man, they were raw, they were real. So what is it about this system that's leading to so much frustration?
Well, it's a very complex system, no doubt about it. You've got so many different players, right?
Mm.
Insurance companies, providers, pharmaceutical companies, all
Mhm.
with their own interests, their own incentives. It's a lot to untangle.
Yeah, no kidding. It seems like it shouldn't be this hard, just to get the care you need. And that's what really comes through in those Reddit comments. It's that feeling of just like banging your head against the wall.
Right, exactly. And one of the biggest friction points, one of the things people really get stuck on is that whole insurance approval process. A lot of the comments mention those denial rates.
Right. So like how often an insurance company just says, nope, not covering that.
Exactly. And we talked about how United Healthcare, their denial rate is double the industry average.
Yeah.
So what is it about them? Are they just super strict or something?
Yeah. What leads to a denial rate that high?
Well, I mean, a few things, I guess. They use these algorithms, these guidelines to decide what they'll cover, and they're often, well, really complicated, hard for patients to understand, even doctors sometimes.
Oh, great. So even the doctors don't always know what's going on.
Right. And then there's the whole pre-authorization thing.
Hmm.
Right. You need the insurance company to say, okay, before you can even get certain treatments, procedures.
So even if you like have insurance, it doesn't mean you'll actually get the care you need.
Yeah, it's like a constant battle. And sadly, that's the reality for a lot of people. And then, if they deny your claim, you have to go through this whole appeals process, which can be just incredibly long and frustrating. You're gathering medical records, you're writing letters, maybe even going through external reviews. It's a lot.
And I mean, that all takes time and energy on top of just like the emotional stress of being sick,
Yeah.
dealing with a health issue. It's no wonder people are so angry.
Exactly. And for a lot of folks, it's not just the hassle, it's the financial burden. I mean, even with insurance, you've got deductibles, co-pays, all these out-of-pocket costs. And it can be, it can be crippling.
Yeah, there was one comment, it was pretty stark. They said, it's cheaper to buy a gun than a month of health insurance.
Wow.
It really stuck with me.
Yeah, no, it's a powerful statement and it reflects a real problem. The cost of healthcare here in the US, it's so much higher than in other developed countries. It's a huge burden on individuals, on families. I mean, medical debt, it's a leading cause of bankruptcy here.
So it's hard to get the care you need. And then when you do, it can be like insanely expensive.
Right, it's this double whammy.
And it almost feels like, and this is what I keep hearing from people, it feels like the system prioritizes profits over actual people.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what's fueling this anger, right? These insurance companies, they're publicly traded. They have to answer to shareholders. They're all about maximizing profits.
And so you end up with this tension, this conflict between, making money and actually providing good care.
Yeah, and that's really the core of a lot of this frustration. People feel like they're just a number, a dollar sign, not a patient, not a human being.
It's like they're seen as just like a collection of potential costs,
Yeah.
not a person who needs help. And it seems like this case with CEO, it's really brought that to light, made people really think about that.
Absolutely. It's definitely sparked a conversation about, the need for reform, for a system that actually puts patients first. I mean, there are other models out there, right? Like you look at other countries with universal health care where everyone gets care regardless of their income or their job.
Yeah, that's a huge topic, maybe one we could explore in a future deep dive. But But for now, let's get back to this case. We've looked at, the public reaction, the bigger context of healthcare in America. But what about the killer? What was their motive? Officially, it's still unknown, right?
Right.
I mean, is there any chance this could be tied to like broader social unrest? Like this rage that we're seeing online, could it spill over into real-world violence?
It's definitely a possibility. I mean, we've seen how this frustration with the system can really build up. Sometimes it boils over, It turns into anger, resentment, and in some cases, yeah, violence. We can't like speculate on the exact motive in this case, but it is important to think about the potential for copycat actions or even, maybe this inspires a more organized movement.
That's a pretty scary thought.
Yeah.
But it also raises the question of like, how do we channel this anger, this frustration into something good,
Yeah.
something that can actually lead to change?
Yeah.
Because it's clear the system isn't working.
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, right? It's going to take a multi-pronged approach,
Yeah.
We need to tackle those systemic problems, those rising costs, that whole mess of the insurance process. We need to find ways to hold these companies accountable, make sure they're putting patients first, not just profits. And we need to help patients, empower them to advocate for themselves, to demand better.
It sounds like a tall order.
It is.
But it's a conversation that we need to have. In this case, as tragic as it is, maybe it can be a catalyst for that,
Yeah, I think so. It's definitely brought a lot of dark stuff to the surface, but it's also created this space, this opportunity to really think about our values, to think about what we want for the future, to demand better.
So where do we even start? What can individuals do? Is it all about like voting for different policies or are there things people can do right now in their own lives?
Well, I mean, staying informed is huge, right? Understanding how the system works, knowing your rights as a patient, and keeping up with those policy debates, that's a good starting point. And, don't underestimate your own voice. Contact your representatives, share your stories, be vocal, demand change.
That's a good reminder. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by it all, but we're not totally powerless.
No, definitely not.
There are things we can do to make our voices heard.
Absolutely. And remember, you're not alone in this. I mean, there are millions of Americans going through this, facing these same challenges. There are groups, organizations out there working to improve things, advocating for change. Connect with those folks, share your experiences, support their work.
It can feel daunting, but change is possible. I mean, we've seen it before with other movements. There's no reason why healthcare can't be next.
I'm optimistic. I think this case could be a turning point. It's definitely, brought the issue to the forefront, made people pay attention, and that's a crucial first step.
Okay, so we've talked about the problems, the frustration, even the potential for things to, get out of hand.
Yeah.
But let's zoom out a bit. Like, what are the bigger implications of this whole thing? What does it tell us about America, about where we are as a society?
Well, it forces us to confront some hard truths, right? It reveals this growing gap, between the wealthy, the powerful, and then everyone else, the people who are struggling just to get by. It shows the flaws in a system that, should be there to protect the vulnerable, but it often doesn't. And I think it also highlights this erosion of trust in institutions.
Man, that's a sobering assessment.
Yeah.
But an important one, right? We can't fix things if we're not willing to look at them, to see the problems.
Exactly. In this case, it's a wake-up call. We can't afford to be complacent. We got to be engaged. We got to actively work to create the kind of society we want to live in.
Okay, so where do we go from here? I know we've talked about a lot of heavy stuff, but I'm hoping we can end on, maybe not optimism exactly, but at least a sense of possibility. Like what gives you hope when you look at this situation? What are some signs that things might be changing for the better?
Well, just the fact that we're having this conversation, that's a good sign, right? Awareness is the first step. And the more we talk about these issues, the more we bring them into the light, the harder it is to ignore them.
Right. Like they say, sunlight is the best disinfectant.
Yeah.
But is awareness enough? What else needs to happen to create like real change that lasts?
Well, we've got to move from awareness to action. And that means holding our elected officials accountable, demanding policies that that actually help people, everyday folks, supporting those organizations, fighting for healthcare reform, for economic justice, for a more equitable society.
So it's not just about individual choices, it's about changing the system itself.
Yeah, we got to shift the power, create a system that actually responds to the needs of the people it's supposed to serve.
It can feel overwhelming, like where do you even begin?
Right.
But history shows us that change is possible. I mean, it takes time, it takes effort, it takes a lot of people working together, but it can happen.
Absolutely. Look at the civil rights movement, the women's suffrage movement, the LGBTQ plus rights movement. I mean, all these movements that at the time seemed impossible. But they succeeded because they came together, they demanded better.
That's a good point. It's a reminder that we're not powerless. We can make a difference. But it starts with each of us. It starts with, these conversations, with learning, with taking action in our own communities.
I completely agree. It doesn't happen overnight, but it does happen, And it happens when people decide enough is enough, when they're willing to stand up, to fight for something better.
So this deep dive, it's taken us on quite a ride, right? From the death of the CEO to the brokenness of our healthcare system to these bigger questions about corporate power, about our responsibility to each other. But I think the takeaway here is that we're not just like watching this all happen. We're not just bystanders. We have a role to play in shaping the future.
Yeah.
In deciding what kind of world we want to live in.
And that future, it's uncertain, yeah. But it's full of possibility.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's given you something to think about, some new perspectives on these issues, and maybe most importantly, a sense of hope that things can change, that we can make a difference.
It's been a pleasure.
And to our listeners, we encourage you to keep the conversation going,
Yeah.
Talk to your friends, your family, your colleagues. Get involved in your community. And most importantly, don't be afraid to demand better. The future, it's ours to create. So we've covered a lot, right? The murder itself, the public's reaction, the problems with the healthcare system. But I guess I keep coming back to this question of, what does this all say about corporate power, about accountability, especially now with the gap between the rich and everyone else getting so big? It feels like, I don't know, like there's this huge disconnect between the people at the top and regular people struggling to afford basic things like healthcare.
Yeah, it's a really important question. You've got these corporate leaders, right, making decisions that affect millions of lives. And so often it seems like profit comes first, not people. And then on the other side, you have individuals feeling totally powerless, stuck in a system that feels rigged against them.
And it's that disconnect, right? That feeling of like no one's listening, no one cares, that breeds resentment, distrust. It's what we saw in those Reddit comments, right?
Oh, absolutely. When people feel like their voices don't matter, that the system just doesn't care about their needs, they start to lose faith. They lose faith in the institutions, the people who are supposed to be looking out for them.
And that can be dangerous, right? I mean, we've seen a rise in extremism, social unrest, even violence.
Yeah.
Could it be a symptom of that, like a sign of min's to come?
It's certainly possible. We're talking about some deep-seated anger here, a sense that, that the American dream, it's slipping away for a lot of people. And when that happens, when people feel like they're being left behind, well, yeah, it can create a breeding ground for more extreme reactions.
So what do we do? Is it all doom and gloom, or is there hope here? What gives you hope when you look at this whole situation?
Well, I think the fact that we're even having this conversation, that's a good sign, right? Awareness, that's always the first step. The more we talk about these things, the more we shine a light on them, the harder it is to just sweep them under the rug.
That's true. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, right? But is awareness enough? What else needs to happen to create real change, lasting change?
We have to move beyond just talking. We have to move to action. That means holding our leaders accountable, demanding policies that put people first. It means supporting those organizations out there, the ones that are fighting for healthcare reform, for economic justice, for a more equitable world.
So it's not just about individual choices. It's about changing the system itself.
Right, exactly. We need to shift the balance of power, create a system that's truly responsive to the people it's supposed to serve.
That can sound pretty daunting. I mean, changing the whole system.
It is a big task.
But history has shown us that even the most powerful systems, they can change. It takes time, it takes work, it takes a lot of people coming together. but it's possible.
Oh, absolutely. Look at the civil rights movement, the women's suffrage movement, the fight for LGBTQ plus rights. I mean, all these movements that at the time seemed impossible, they succeeded because people didn't give up. They came together, they demanded change, and they got it.
That's a powerful reminder. It's easy to feel like we're powerless, but we're not.
Wow.
We have a voice, we can make a difference, but it starts with us. It starts with these conversations, with educating ourselves, with taking action in our own communities.
I couldn't agree more. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it does happen. And it happens when people decide they're not going to accept the status quo anymore, when they're willing to stand up and fight for something better.
Well, this deep dive has, well, it's taken us to some pretty dark places, right? We started with this tragic death, then explored the brokenness of our healthcare system, and ended up talking about some really big questions about power, about responsibility, about what kind of society we want to live in. But I think the takeaway here is that we're not just, watching this all unfold. We're not just bystanders. We have a role to play. We can shape the future.
And that future, it's full of possibilities, even if we can't see them all right now.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's given you some things to think about, some new insights, and maybe most importantly, a sense of hope,
Yeah.
a sense that things can change, that we can be part of that change.
It's been a pleasure being here.
And to our listeners, we encourage you to keep this conversation going. Talk to your friends, talk to your family, your colleagues, get involved in your community, and don't be afraid to demand better. The future, it's up to us. We get to decide what it looks like.